over the initial.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, there we go. Welcome in to episode 2 of the RotoWire Sports Gambling Podcast, sponsored by BetMGM. Nick Whalen, John McKechnie back with you as we preview week 2 of the NFL season. Make sure if you're betting on BetMGM, the best sports book, you're using our promo code for this podcast, BetRoto, BETROTO. That's BetRoto. You could do that via the BetMGM app or, of course, at BetMGM.com if you're located in a participating state. But Jonathan, last week we had a lot of fun on this podcast previewing week 1, but we didn't have any games to look back on. And we'll spend most of the show, laying out our leans and our biggest question marks kind of heading into week 2. But of course, we have to recap week 1. So I want to ask you, how did your various bets, fantasy teams, all the action that you had going in week 1, how'd you come out?
Came out okay. Let's see here. So some of the best ball portfolio looking better than expected. The Jahan Dotson, Devin Duvernay combo for like the late round receiver strategy that seems to be panning out well. Feel good about the James Robinson, your boy, exposure as well. I have a lot of Travis Etienne. Not worried about him, nor am I worried about Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts, other guys that I have a lot of exposure to, even if they didn't really crush it last week. Thoroughly concerned about my Ezekiel Elliott shares. Not really because of Zeke, but I think the Cowboys are about to go to the sunken place, essentially, and I'm not sure if they get out of it, and it's just going to be tough for them without Dak. And I think my big point from that Sunday night game was that the injury didn't really end the game for the Cowboys. Like, they had played terribly basically all the way up to that, so that really was like a literal adding of injury to insult at the end of that game on Sunday night. So that was brutal. And then just kind of from a sheer fan perspective, I don't know if that Monday night game could have been possibly more fun. Like, it was so loud in Seattle, and you could literally like hear it through the TV. It was electric. You got all these people in neon green just looking very menacingly at Russell Wilson. They are so mad at him, and I love that. Like that. There's something to be said for just having that raw emotion, for actually being mad at Russell Wilson for leaving. So good on them, and for them to come out and get the win. And we'll kind of unpack what that means for the Seahawks for this week later on. But week 1, the NFL always delivers, but that felt like a particularly good one, like all the way through from Thursday night, and then the witching hour from the early games on Sunday, phenomenal as well. And then it ended with a game that should have on paper been a blowout for the Broncos. It ended up being an amazing game.
Yeah, amazing for reasons that we could never have expected. A cocktail of just ridiculous play calling, clock management, fumbles at the goal line by 2 different running backs. As someone who had some rooting interest in the Denver Broncos in that game, it was not an ideal outcome. But like you said, a great way to cap off the week if you're just watching as a football fan. Good start for us on a couple of the prop bets that we tossed out in the first episode last week. Aaron Rodgers under 31.5 touchdown passes. That's one that I've been beating the drum for. Of course, did not throw a single touchdown pass against the Minnesota Vikings. You were big on Dak Prescott under 31.5 touchdown passes. You hate to see it go down this way, but if Dak misses 4, 5, 6 weeks here, that one's looking like it'll be close to a lock. You also talked about Justin Jefferson. I think he was 8-1 to lead the league in receiving. He's off to a fantastic start. Really, all the elite receivers, it felt like, maybe with the exception of CeeDee Lamb, had huge week 1s. But a lot to get to. Of course, we'll hit on some of the the bigger results from week 1 and try to put that in context as we look ahead to week 2. But looking up and down the slate, I mean, we have kind of a complete opposite week 2 slate compared to week 1 that had all these big road favorites. And we talked about it last week. We knew some of those games were going to go the other way. Not all these big road favorites were going to win. I don't know if we expected the Bears to win outright against the 49ers. I certainly don't think we called a tie between the Colts and the Texans. The AFC South is winless after 1 week, despite 2 teams playing each other. But if you look at like Circa Survivor, for example, which our good pal Jeff Erickson, I know he ponied up and bought in on Survivor this year. He took the Bengals, RIP Jeff, but almost 57% of the entries in Circus Survivor were wiped out in week 1, which is insane. I mean, the Ravens were the most popular team, so they made it through. But the next 4 most popular picks, the Colts, the Titans, the 49ers, and the Broncos, were all losers. And of course, in Survivor, if you tie, that counts as a loss. So a brutal, brutal end for those who took the Colts. We'll get to some Survivor talk at the end of the show, as we always do. But I want to ask you, as we look at this week 2 slate now, as of right now at BetMGM, we have 4 teams that are double-digit favorites: the Rams, the Broncos, the Packers, and the Bills. We also have the 49ers sitting at -8.5 over the Seattle Seahawks. That number was up, it was kind of bobbing around closer to 10. It's now been bet down to 8.5. But of all those heavy favorites this week, which is the game that you're most concerned about? One of those teams either not covering or, like we saw last week, not even winning outright.
So most concerned, I would say the Broncos, and I think that marries up with. It feels like Vegas maybe hasn't quite hasn't given the due respect to Houston and fair, it's Davis Mills. It's a pretty no-name cast of characters down there in Houston, but they're a cagey bunch, as Indianapolis experienced this past week. And, I think that there's kind of a general betting philosophy that going up to altitude this time of year, it tends to benefit the Broncos. But I looked back over the last 5 years, and I think they're like 500 or maybe one game below 500 at home against the spread, dating back to 2018, 2017. So it's not like there's that distinct home field advantage. And I think that some of the problems with the Broncos just aren't going to get ironed out right away. Like Nathaniel Hackett had some concerning coaching moves throughout the course of that game in Seattle. In reality, Seattle should have had no business winning that game, let alone hanging around it. And yet, of course you get a couple of fluky fumbles at the goal line, but I blame Hackett for at least one of them, because Russell Wilson was they had gotten stopped short. That tight end caught the ball right at the goal line. He's just short. They are not set for that play. You have some timeouts to burn one, get set, call a play where you're comfortable and you're in a good setup. Instead, they just kind of rush the play. Javonte Williams fumbles it at the goal line, and the game kind of flows from there. So I do not trust Nathaniel Hackett just yet. And I think that the rest of this Broncos team kind of suffers as a result. So until we see otherwise, I'm not trusting them with more than a touchdown, not even against the Texans.
So I've put a lot of thought into what happened at the end of that Seattle game. And I came to the conclusion that I think Hackett was dead set on making sure he had 3 timeouts, in case they either went for it on 4th down and didn't get it, or kicked the field goal and missed it. And you understand that logic. You're thinking, okay, no matter what, we'd be handing them the ball at midfield, and we could maybe get a stop and hopefully have 20 seconds left and try to make something happen. I think by the time he kind of forgot that he had to make a decision on what to do on 4th down, and then I think by the time he decided we're kicking it, the play clock was low enough that you can't hustle your field goal unit out there with 15 seconds left on the play clock and rush a 64-yard field goal of all field goals. And then, of course, had to burn the timeout, and it just turned to a disaster from there. But I kind of look at that team the other way. Yes, you're maybe a little worried about Hackett's decision making. I mean, that was Mike McCarthy-esque. I think that was maybe another level up. Mike McCarthy is tearing up watching that game. This is my son. But I think that you have to look at how Denver dominated that game, really the final 3 quarters. Seattle came out hot. They had some scripted plays. I thought they did a really good job of using, backs and tight ends. You had guys running all over the place. It was kind of a 49ers-esque look to how they started that game. But, Denver dominated virtually every single stat category when you look at it. And, if you punch in even one of those fumbles on the goal line, or even if you just get a field goal out of both of those drives, this game looks a lot different. So I'm willing to pile on Hackett. He deserves it. But I also think Denver, other than some just weird decisions and some weird breaks, played a pretty good game, and they were gashing Seattle on the ground virtually the entire night. So I think this is a pretty favorable spot for Denver. But, I mean, give it 10 points to the Houston Texans. It feels like this is the second year in a row where we've just completely written off the Texans. You just assume that they're a free win every single year. Last year, they blow out the Jags in week 1, which, yes, it is the Jaguars. But you got to remember, at the time, we thought the Jags might be good. People were fired up for the Urban Meyer Jaguars going
There was
into
some
week
survivor juice, like on the Jags.
Yeah.
Going into that game.
Yeah. I mean, again, based on how everything spiraled over the next 10 weeks, it seems crazy, but that was a big upset at the time. And of course, Houston went on to lose 8 in a row after that. And I wouldn't be shocked if we see a similar result this week. But yeah, I could see the skepticism for sure with the Broncos. I mean, any trepidation with the Rams covering a big number against the Falcons, Packers and the Bears, Bills and the Titans?
I do actually. So the Rams, I mean, maybe it's just a function of that being a standalone game and just the domination that they kind of had to endure against, what is arguably, or to me, not really arguably, the best team in football in the Buffalo Bills. But you'd still expect the defending Super Bowl champs to come out with a little bit more than what we saw. And I think that there are some elements to this Rams team in their performance in Week 1 that is concerning for the longer term. It doesn't feel like they have that established second receiving threat necessarily. Obviously, like Allen Robinson was trending on Twitter just because of how much like fantasy angst there was, and forcing the ball to Cooper Kupp, like usually like a very good idea. And I think that they'll continue to do that, but that can't be literally the only thing. And I don't think Stafford looked as sharp. You're down 60% of the offensive line starts from a season ago. No Andrew Whitworth, of course, suffered some injuries in training camp. So that offensive line not looking so good. The run game, very confusing right now with, whatever the Cam Akers issue seems to be with Sean McVay. So I don't think that this is a quick fix necessarily. And I know that the Rams have the additional rest advantage over the Falcons here. And I think that that's pretty big, in addition to the fact that they're playing at home against a team that just has to travel all the way across the country to get there on a shorter week. But I don't trust the Rams with over 10 points. I think the Falcons might not be as bad as we're expecting. I don't think that it's really going to show up in the win column too much for them this year. I think, 4, maybe 5 wins is a reasonable expectation for the Falcons, but they seem like they're at least reasonably equipped to compete in a real life NFL game in a way that it didn't really feel like they were for much of last season. So I like the Rams to win outright. I don't think they're on upset watch, but I do think that I would be a little bit nervous about trusting them with 10 points. This was a line that when it was posted last week, or when it was still pre-week 1, this was Rams minus 13. So that kind of tells you that the opinion from the odds makers is soured a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's Atlanta looking better. I think it's the Rams just getting railroaded in week 1 against Buffalo. I'm looking at the total in this game, 46.5. Rams have gone under in 7 of their last 8 home games against the total. I kind of like that trend. I mean, we didn't see much explosiveness from this Rams offense. I do think they make a concerted effort to get Allen Robinson more involved, much like I think we see Devontae Smith more involved against the Minnesota Vikings this week. But other than Cooper Kupp, it just didn't seem like they had any juice. I mean, the running back situation was a mess. I think if you're rostering Cam Akers in fantasy, you're in full on panic mode at this point based on how that game played out. But I think the Rams do take care of business. I don't see it being extremely convincing. I mean, they're not a team like the Bills where they're super high powered and you're gonna come away from these wins saying like this is definitively the best team in the league. Even last season, the Rams at no point did you ever feel, except for after the Super Bowl, that this was truly the best team. They had so many ups and downs. They tend to win ugly, and I think that's probably what we see again this week. Allen Robinson receptions prop, by the way, 4.5 this week. You got any take on that?
Yeah, I think that I'm going to go along with what you were saying there, where there has to be some sort of correction to this passing game, and it likely results in Allen Robinson seeing groundbreaking take here, more than 2 targets that like he did in the season opener. So I think that he definitely gets more involved in it. I think that, AJ Terrell, obviously not a total household name, but he is one of the better young corners in the league. I'm not saying he's going to shut down Cooper Kupp, but I think that he's going to shut off enough avenues, enough times to where on those Matthew Stafford dropbacks, Robinson might be the only viable target available to him in those ones. So I do like the over for Robinson in this setup. I think that we start to see a bit of a correction there as the Rams strive to be a little bit more balanced in the passing game.
All right, there you have it. Strong words from John. AJ Terrell going to shut out Cooper Kupp in this game. Let's get to our first segment. Week 2, we did the same thing in week 1. Lines that stand out to us. So we're going to start with a couple lines that are just a little bit too high. And I'll kick it to you first. So give me your first line that you're looking at over at BetMGM, and you're saying, I just think this is a little too much.
As our wonderful listeners could imagine, not really trusting the Broncos to cover a big number, at least not yet. And I'm a little bit, again, I'm very, very sold on the Bills. I do think that they are the best team, but this line has moved a lot. And I think that, a lot of that has to do with the Titans kind of laying a dud against the Giants. Again, that marries up nicely with just the survivor carnage that came from week 1. A lot of people had the Titans as well. But the Titans have traditionally played the Bills very tough. They've kind of been a thorn in the Bills' side. Either I see this game going one of two ways, where either the Titans really come in there and make this a tough, grinded out game for the Bills, or the Bills make yet another statement on this Monday night. So this is 2 standalone primetime games that the Bills get to start their season. They're on even more extended rest than the Rams will be. And they just, kind of blow out the Titans. The Titans unable to kind of find the offensive horsepower to keep pace on the scoreboard. So I see it going one of those two ways, but I'll still defer to the kind of track record that Mike Vrabel has in these type of games, where the second that he starts to get doubted, counted out, that type of thing, that's when the Titans seem to rise up. We'll see if they're able to do that with this current core of players, but I think that it's a little bit much to not so much to trust the Bills with 10 points, but to be like the Titans are for sure going to lose by double digits.
Yeah, I agree. To me, this one feels like a little bit of an overcorrection. I mean, Tennessee absolutely should have won that game against the Giants. I mean, they had multiple opportunities to put it away, and just kind of some fluky plays at the end. I thought the Tennessee defense actually did a pretty good job in that game. But this feels like a little too much to me. Maybe a little too much respect for the Bills, who did lose to Tennessee last year. And as much as we love the Bills, I think they still need to prove, and they've gone a long way toward doing this with how they beat the Rams in week 1, but they still need to prove that they're not this team that, much like last year when they were in a similar position, we thought they were one of the Super Bowl favorites. They take that loss at Tennessee in week 6. They have that weird opening week loss to the Steelers. They have that bizarre, like the weirdest loss of the entire season at Jacksonville. Man. That was at the absolute height of the Urban Meyer drama. They lose that game. And then 2 weeks later, they get blown out by the Colts. So in the back of my mind, I'm still thinking like, all right, the Bills, this is kind of a prove it game for me, because it is, I wouldn't call it quite a trap game, but I would feel a little iffy about picking the Bills to cover this large of a number. And, in my Pick'em Confidence League pool that I'm sure I'll reference plenty of times throughout the season, I'm being a little cautious with Buffalo. I think there's going to be a lot of big numbers on Buffalo this week, and I don't want to get caught up in that. I'm going to throw out the elephant in the room here. I know this is on your list as well. The Patriots are -2 at the Steelers. The Patriots looked absolutely terrible in week 1 against Miami. Granted, the Steelers offense, I think what the defense was able to do, forcing 5 turnovers on Joe Burrow and obviously winning that game in overtime, kind of washes away all the sins of the offense. But if you were watching that game, the Pittsburgh offense was horrendous. I mean, possibly even worse than what New England looked like against Miami. So I kind of understand where this line is coming from, but to me, it should be, Pittsburgh -1 or make it a pickup, but Pat's -2. I feel like we're being baited here.
I do too. And it seems like the public is very much on the Steelers. I think that
big time.
Yeah, it's a very, very like public pick. And that makes me very, kind of nervous. Maybe, and I wrote about it in my article. I believe you touched on it as well, but it's like, maybe I am a donkey here, but like, I just don't really see how you can view the New England Patriots in their current form as a road favorite against a at least decent AFC opponent. Like this is the Pittsburgh home opener. Again, they're going to be without TJ Watt. That definitely hurts that pass rush. That if Watt's there, maybe this one is maybe like he's one of the very few defenders that I think could have any sort of influence on a betting line. But I think that Watt was that kind of difference maker. He was crushing it against the Bengals until he suffered that injury. But Minkah Fitzpatrick still played out of his mind. But I digress. I just feel like this is an ugly, ugly game. And I think that that's exactly kind of where Tomlin envisions his team being able to kind of figure out its way to getting the win. Whereas, Belichick, he's obviously like the greatest coach ever, but I don't think that offense with the Dumb and Dumber brain trust of Matt Patricia and Joe Judge are going to be cagey enough to figure their way out of that one or coach their way out of a wet paper bag. So I like the Steelers to win this one outright and, obviously cover the spread in doing so. So, again, maybe over 2/3, maybe even like 3/4 of the public bets are going to be on Pittsburgh, but I'm going to go with it. I just don't really see it from this New England team. They look totally uninspired against Miami. And I don't see it getting better in Pittsburgh.
Bill Belichick hasn't started 0-1 since 2001, or excuse me, 0-2 since 2001. So there's a lot of history on the line here. I mean, New England 6-1 straight up in their last 7 games against Pittsburgh. The total's gone under in 5 of the last 6 meetings. I would bet that it's going to go under again in this one. I mean, this could be like 6-3 in favor of the Pats or like 2-0 in favor of the Steelers. And I'm not ruling anything out, but I came away from that win over the Bengals feeling better about the Bengals and somehow worse about the Steelers. And part of that was Najee Harris was banged up, although he's claiming he's going to play. Mike Tomlin has pumped the brakes on that a little bit. And then, of course, you lose TJ Watt for what it seems like best case is probably half the season. But, despite being +5 in turnovers in that win, the Steelers ran 33 fewer plays. They had 19 fewer first downs. They finished with 165 fewer yards, and they only entered the red zone twice the entire game.
Dang, those are some stats that would paint a picture. Without the +5 in the turnover column, you would assume that's just a complete blowout win for the Bengals. But the Bengals found a way to kind of tap into their ways of old and lose that type of game.
Yeah, I mean, that was an unbelievable loss. I was looking at the ESPN win probability, which is almost a meme at this point. Anytime you're pulling that up, something terrible is about to happen. And I think it was right after the Jamar Chase touchdown, Cincinnati had like a 98% chance to win that game. I mean, the win percentage graph was just all over the place over the fourth quarter and into overtime. I'm going to throw out another line that I'm a little iffy on. San Francisco -8.5 against Seattle. And this one was close to being double digits. Like we mentioned at the top, it's been bet down a little bit. We're seeing some respect, coming in for Seattle. A lot of money coming in on Seattle as well. And by the way, the Seahawks 15-2 straight up in their last 17 against San Francisco. I mean, they have owned this matchup. That spans, multiple quarterbacks, multiple coaches, I think, for San Francisco. But it's a trend nonetheless. And, I'm totally willing to throw out last week's result for the 49ers, but it's no guarantee that George Kittle is back for this game. And I thought Seattle acquitted itself pretty well, especially Geno Smith, starting 18 of 19, I think he was at one point in that Monday night game. So I was pretty shocked when I think I initially saw this line at Niners -10. And I know we're predicting them to be the better team and you don't want to get too caught up in week 1, but that's a little bit too big for me.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable. Like, the Niners are a team that go into Chicago as touchdown favorites. And like you said, there were some factors at play with you don't see a freshwater hurricane all that often in the NFL, but that's kind of where we were at up in Chicago, Lake Michigan last week. I still just think that the 49ers, like maybe they're a soft NFC championship entrant from a year ago. I think that, that game, not to pick any scabs, but, that was more on the Packers than it was the Niners advancing necessarily. But the Niners are still a good team. Kittle, that's a huge factor. And Trey Lance obviously needs to play better here. But I do feel like there's I think all the public being all over Seattle, it's because I think they were captivated by that Monday night game and what they saw and how much better it went, relative to their expectations. But that's such an emotionally charged game for that Seahawks locker room. And they were at home Monday night. All the lights are on them. I think that we see a bit of a letdown. I think we see them play a little bit closer to our preseason expectations for the Seahawks here. So the question is now, like, can the 49ers live up to their expectations that we had for them coming into the year. And I do actually think, yes, it makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, of course, with the unknown. We still haven't really seen Trey Lance have a ton of success at this level, but I think that the Niners can still be set up to take advantage of this one and win it convincingly, and ergo cover that spread.
Well, first of all, you should never be comfortable if you're talking spread picks, right? In theory, this is 50-50. If you like a spread too much, that's probably a red flag. I'm more worried about the 49ers side of things. I'm with you. I think Seattle, it's almost hard to take anything away from that game because it's such a singular, matchup. It's opening night. Like, I think if the Broncos had played Seattle in like week 9, it would have been a completely different environment. I think it was just so fresh. And it's the first game of the year. I know a lot of people said they thought it would be like 70-30 cheers versus boos or 50-50. It was like 90-10 boos versus cheers for Russell Wilson. I think that was probably a surprise to a lot of people. It might have been a surprise to the Broncos and to Russell Wilson, just how hostile of an environment that was. I mean, we saw all these former Seahawks players are chiming in, even Carroll's comments after the game. I mean, I think people who followed this for a while, you kind of realized where things were headed with Wilson in Seattle. But I think a lot of casual fans were kind of taken aback at how much vitriol there was directed toward Russell Wilson. And
like Doug Baldwin throwing in some tweets.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, it's, again, nothing shocking if you've been kind of trailing this story for the last decade, but it all kind of came to a head. So I think you're right. I think, we probably see some sort of an emotional letdown from Seattle this week, but I just think, 8.5, 9, if this creeps up closer to double digits again, that's just a lot of faith to put in a team that might not have George Kittle, that doesn't have its starting running back, that has essentially a rookie quarterback who's made a handful of starts under weird circumstances. You can't really take anything from last week. We're still not really sure if Trey Lance is good. There's just a lot of variance here. I think this line could easily be San Francisco 6.5, 7.5. And I don't think that I wouldn't really balk at that whatsoever. Let's talk about Cleveland and the Jets. The game of the week. Everybody's going to be talking about it. You got to have some talking points prepared for the water cooler tomorrow.
Buzzing in the streets right now.
Yeah, everybody's going to be asking who you got. Cleveland's up to 6.5 at BetMGM, and I was not exactly blown away by the Browns in week 1. They probably should have blown that game against Carolina. Got bailed out with a long field goal at the end of that one, but I thought the defense had some just insane let-ups in the second half. I mean, they were owning that game through the first 2.5 quarters. And then you give up that 75-yarder to Robbie Anderson. That's like the one thing you cannot do at that point in the game. And, some concerning letdowns by that defense late. With that said, this is not a great opponent in the Jets, but I know you kept a really close eye on Jets-Ravens last week. We saw 59 pass attempts from the Joe Flacco raid offense. Is this just a situation where, the odds makers are really, really down on the Jets? Because I don't know how you're giving Cleveland almost a full touchdown here after they barely squeaked by Carolina with Jacoby Brissett, kind of doing the most basic game managing possible.
Yeah, that in the pantheon of Ravens games that I've watched, my live digestion of that game was fairly limited. Like I of course have gone back and watched what I needed to and dug into and read everything that I needed to, but like by like halftime, I was so disgusted with how the Ravens had played at that point. I just started making crunch wraps. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Am I familiar with the crunch wraps? Yes, I am.
I always forget where you're at on some of your fast food takes, but good to know that you're on the right side of history with that one. But I think that this game overall, and the crunch wraps were delicious, by the way. But
that's a good one.
I like how this game is a nice, I wrote about it in the article. It's a nice do's and don'ts for how to approach your game plan when you have a backup quarterback starting. Like the Browns, they went ahead. Yes, Jacoby Brissett threw it 34 times, but they ran it more than they threw it overall. The Jets, obviously a slightly different game flow going on. They're playing from behind, but still, you cannot go into a game feeling comfortable with Joe Flacco in the year of our Lord 2022, throwing almost 60 passes like he was playing at Texas Tech or something. That's not a recipe for success. I don't care how good your receivers are. It's just not going to work. So I think that, this, correct me if I'm wrong, has this gone up from like 5.5, something like that earlier in the week? So I'm not surprised that it's gone in this direction. I think that, this Browns team, is going to be one that benefits from its early schedule here. And I think that, that some losses are coming for them because they have Jacoby Brissett at quarterback. But right now, I think the Jets might be wearing the crown of being the worst team in football or close to it. They really seem like a sorry bunch. I was not impressed with them. I don't take any like real positives away on the Ravens side for going into the Meadowlands and beating them. So this is a bad Jets team. They're going on the road to Cleveland. I think Cleveland wins by a touchdown. So it feels like a lot of points to be trusting with Jacoby Brissett. So, it's certainly not one of my best bets of the week. But at the same time, I see a lot more ways in which the Browns just kind of suffocate and cover than the Jets, making this one interesting or let alone coming away with the win.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is just the Jets did a really good job, I thought, slowing down the Ravens rushing attack. And, I know the Ravens are down their top two running backs, but that told me a lot, I think, about that defense, forcing Lamar to do it through the air, which of course he had no issue doing. But, if you have similar success against Cleveland, I don't think Jacoby Brissett is capable of airing it out the way that Lamar was to give Baltimore that win in week one. So I'm keeping an eye there. I mean, if it stays under 7, yeah, I'm comfortable with it. Cleveland probably wins by at least a touchdown, but if it gets to 7, that's becoming in the stay away zone for me. Let's talk Tampa, New Orleans quickly, and then then we'll do the read before we get into some more topics here. But that's the last one that we have as kind of a crossover on our list here. Tampa minus 2.5 at New Orleans. I played some guess the lines with Jeff on the XM show earlier this week. Just made a complete fool of myself with this one. I think I guessed like New Orleans 2.5. Just a huge swing, not even close. All the numbers favor New Orleans, right? They're 7-1 against the spread in the last 18 against Tampa Bay. They're 7-1 straight up in that span. They've really owned this rivalry for the better part of the last decade. New Orleans is 4-16 against, or 16-4, excuse me, against Tampa Bay in the last 20 meetings straight up. I mean, that's insane. And I didn't think the Bucs looked all that great against Dallas in week one. Dallas's defense deserves some credit for that, but Tampa settled for a ton of field goals. You, of course, lose Chris Godwin. Literally every receiver on the depth chart is questionable as of right now for Tampa Bay, and we expect most of those guys to play. But Mike Evans was hobbled in week one. He's questionable. Julio's questionable. Russell Gage, Rashad Berriman, they're questionable. Leonard Fournette looked like he tweaked his hamstring at the end of that week one game. He's questionable. And yet we're seeing the Bucs favored in this game. It's a lot of respect for Tom Brady. I get that. And I know the line is down. It opened at Tampa -4. And, we should mention New Orleans did not look great. Probably shouldn't have beat Atlanta in week one. But to me, this is kind of a rat line, John.
No, I think that's totally fair. Like you said, history is certainly on New Orleans' side in this matchup. And it's not just harkening back to like the great Drew Brees years while Jameis was on the Bucs throwing the ball to the other team more than he was throwing it to his own team. Rashad Perriman included in that one. But yeah, this is tricky. I mean, how much can you lean on history when now Sean Payton and Drew Brees are both gone out of the equation? I know New Orleans is, again, historically really given this team trouble. That I think the only time that the Bucs have beaten the Saints, it was actually when it counted on their way to winning the Super Bowl a couple years ago. This really is, like you said, one of the trickier ones to figure out, because it feels like on paper Tampa Bay should win this one, even with the injury report looking like it does, and even with Mike Evans having the history that he does against New Orleans, where Lattimore seems to really have his number and kind of not everyone else's necessarily. I gotta just go with Tampa Bay here. I think the defense is strong enough to where I think they force Jameis into some turnovers, but I feel sick to my stomach about it. Like, New Orleans at home, seemingly being able to do what they do against this Tampa Bay team. I feel very bad about it, but when it comes down to it, I think New Orleans makes enough mistakes on offense to where the Buccaneers can convert and get the win. So I will take the Bucs to cover, but again, not feeling awesome.
Yeah, if the Bucs win this game, it's going to be ugly. It's probably going to be ugly no matter what, if we're being honest. But the passing game didn't look great against Dallas. Brady got sacked in a couple key moments. The left tackle situation remains a pretty major issue for Tampa Bay. But it is true. I mean, New Orleans did not have a single sack against the Falcons last week. And part of that is you have an ultra mobile quarterback in Marcus Mariota, and you have the complete opposite now in Tom Brady stepping in this week. But this one to me is just I want no part of betting it. The fact that the line favors Tampa Bay like it does just makes me even more uncomfortable. But I'm going to be siding with New Orleans, I think, at least in Pick'em, and we'll see if I end up throwing down any cash on this game. Real quickly, let's get to a couple lines that are just a little too low, and I'll let you lead this one off.
So for me, there weren't too many this week, but I did feel like, and this one has moved considerably. But I'm so shook from what I saw from the Cardinals last week to where Vegas at home only being 5.5 point favorites. I love that. I think that Las Vegas comes in here, very similar to, or not exactly how Kansas City beat them. Like I don't think it's going to be quite like that, but I love the pass rush combo that Vegas has, and I think that we started to see them wake up later in the second half of their loss to the Chargers, and maybe that had a little bit of something to do with the Chargers just kind of always finding a way, no matter who's there, who's in the building, to just let other teams back into games. It just feels like a Charger move, but still, Carr, Renfro, Adams, Waller. I think Waller can really feast in this particular game. It seems like Isaiah Simmons, he was getting, I don't really see too often in like a national broadcast, a young sort of, not no name, but not a prominent guy in Isaiah Simmons get flambéed by the broadcast the way that Greg Olsen and Burkhardt were kind of laying into him. They're like, okay, pretty much every play they are just exploiting him, and it is working constantly. And obviously it worked out for Travis Kelce. I think that Darren Waller is in for a huge game. I'd look at some of his props for this weekend. Yeah, I think on the other side, the Cardinals offense is just so predictable, and it's kind of bereft of talent right now. I mean, we saw the human Dortch kind of stand out last week. That's how bad things were getting. Too bad about my whatever remaining AJ Green optimism I had. That didn't seem to pan out too well. But bottom line, I think Arizona is trending towards a disaster of a season right after extending their coach and signing Kyler to an extension. Whoops! I just don't see this working out. And I think that this game on Sunday is like going to be another point along the way in terms of seeing where it all went wrong for Arizona. So I love Vegas in this spot.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't love it quite enough to put them in the line's too small category for me, but I like Vegas to win this straight up. I like them to cover in this game. I think a lot of things went wrong for Vegas last week. I mean, Derek Carr was sacked 5 times. Even Devontae Adams was technically sacked in this game, so 6 total sacks for the Chargers defense. And a couple of those were in huge spots, including one on the final drive of the game for Vegas. 3 picks for Derek Carr, and then, like you said, they're still in that game with a chance to win it late in the fourth quarter. So part of that is maybe we're just like a little too excited about the Chargers, but I also think the Raiders are a really good team, and that's a brutal week 1 matchup on the road with a new head coach. So I think they get the benefit of the doubt, and I don't know if the Cardinals do, man. I mean, for one, the Cardinals have no wiggle room because after this, they get the Rams next week. I think we're going to know a lot about the Cardinals depending on how this game goes. If they get smacked and lose this one by 2 touchdowns, I think they're officially, they're probably done. I think we can look back and say that's not a fluke what the Chiefs did to them in week 1, because if they don't put up a fight this week, you got to start getting a little concerned, I think, if you're Cliff Kingsbury, unless, of course, you're holding a Cliff Kingsbury first coach fired ticket, which I don't even know where you can bet that. I feel like most reputable books don't offer like odds to be fired, but they should. They definitely should. I think we would talk about that every week if they did. But yeah, it's going to be a little dicey if and probably when they lose this game to Vegas. I want to talk about Lions Commanders. I thought for the most part, the Lions were pretty solid. There were a couple of those that were a little too big. I had a hard time coming up with a list of lines I thought should be bigger, but should the Lions be bigger than a 1.5 point favorite at home after putting up 35 in a loss against Philly last week?
I'm waffling on this one, and I'm waffling hard. And, earlier this week, I felt like the Lions were the way to go in this one. And, when this opened, the Commanders were road favorites. So, I mean, things have obviously changed in the public eye, despite the Lions losing and the Commanders winning in their respective week 1 matchups. But You look at Detroit from last week, I'm worried about the defense, and it feels like for whatever reason, this just by hook or by crook, Carson Wentz is going to be dragged into competency by the just sheer amount of talent that's around him at receiver, with Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson looking great, Antonio Gibson looking as good as he has in quite some time. So I think that offense for Washington is going to be able to hang some points. I think obviously the Lions can punch back a little bit. You got Swift, you got Amon-Ra St. Brown. Looks like your guy DJ Chark is going to end up being a nice addition to that Lions receiving core as well. But I think that the Lions are just kind of doomed to be playing this like scrappy loser role, and I think that continues. So I think Washington, and this might be the only time that I like really feel not even decent, but okay enough to bet Washington coming away with a win on the road. But I think that they do it in this spot, and I think we just see another tough loss for the Lions faithful, who are totally callous to it.
Yeah, it's hard to really argue with anything that you laid out there. The Lions did put up 35, but a lot of it was in garbage time. Hard to say if Philly might have taken its foot off the gas in the second half of that game. And I mean, my counterpoint to you with Washington would be it was the Jaguars. So you can't really take anything away from that. But you got to, I mean, the receiving core especially looked impressive. I thought Antonio Gibson looked really good. Carson Wentz, minus the 2 interceptions, had himself a heck of a game. So that is easily one of the most difficult games I think to parse of this week. So
and then
last week,
I don't mean to steal from a rival podcast, but isn't the temperature in a dome stadium typically 72 degrees? And isn't Carson Wentz by the book like the best quarterback ever when the temperature is 72 degrees, something like that?
I have no idea. That is very possible. I'm not going to fight you on it, but
we'll get our people working on it.
I can either confirm that nor refute that.
But if those are indeed the conditions inside Ford Field, look out.
Okay, something to monitor for sure. So you won your best bet last week. You had Tampa covering 2.5 against Dallas. That was an easy win. I lost mine. I went San Francisco over Chicago. It was a slippery slope all week. I locked that one in our staff picks column, I think on Wednesday. And like an hour after that, George Kittle gets injured. And then, a couple of days later, we find out about the weather conditions in Chicago, and then, things spiraled from there. So by virtue of me losing my lock, that means I'm doing the read again this week. So buckle up. We got a long road ahead of us here for the next couple minutes. Kick off the new pro football season with the king of sportsbooks. Sign up with BetMGM using promo code BETROTO. That's BETROTO. And your first wager is risk-free up to $1,000. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. All right, here we go. Now the fun stuff. Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Nevada, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Puerto Rico, Tennessee, Virginia, Washington, D.C., West Virginia, Wyoming, or Ontario only. You must be 21 years or older to wager. However, if you're in Ontario, it's only 19 or older. So pretty big perk of living in Ontario. This is a new customer offer only. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards are issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. This excludes Michigan disassociated persons. I have no idea what that is. I've heard that in so many podcasts. Don't know what that means. Either way, please gamble responsibly. Do you have a gambling problem? If so, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. You can call 1-800-522-4700 in Colorado, Washington, D.C., Kansas, Louisiana, Nevada, Wyoming, and Virginia. For confidential help in Michigan, call 1-800-270-7117, 1-800-GAMBLER in Indiana, Maryland, New Jersey, or West Virginia, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. You could call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Call or text the Tennessee Red Line at 800-889-9789 in Tennessee, or in Mississippi, you can call 1-888-777-9696. And finally, in Ontario, if you have questions or concerns about your gambling or someone close to you, please contact Connects Ontario at 1-866-531-2600 to speak to an advisor free of charge. Sports betting is void in Georgia, Hawaii, Ohio, and Utah, as well as other states where prohibited. Promotional offers not available in Nevada and New York. Whew. All right.
Well done.
I gotta hit my best bet this week. I don't think I can make it through another one of those.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I don't feel great about mine, or I don't feel as good. I felt like the Bucks were a layup last week. No such luck this time around. So I'm not wish casting or trying to manifest myself doing that read next week. But frankly, folks, it wouldn't surprise me.
I am wish casting that. I hope you lose your best bet, please, for the sake of my vocal cords. My children, they need this. All right, let's continue our look ahead to week 2. We've talked about a lot of the big favorites. We really haven't talked about the Dallas Cowboys quite yet. I think they probably come away from week 1 not only as the biggest losers on the field, but the biggest losers in terms of injuries. And we talked about TJ Watt. We'll see if T Higgins ends up missing time. Obviously, Keenan Allen got hurt, but Dak being out it seems like at least the next 3 or 4 games, if not longer. That's the biggest injury news of the week. And we saw an immediate adjustment in that line. I think it opened at like Dallas 1.5, Dallas 2, and we're talking all the way back, in May, and kind of sat in that zone. But the Bengals, even coming off of that ugly loss, now sitting at -7.5 at BetMGM. To me, that's a fair number. I mean, I think the Bengals offense, even if Higgins doesn't play, is going to be able to score. Dallas's defense is kind of the one unit that you look to keep them in the game, but I don't see them slowing down this Bengals team. I think they're too good.
Yeah, I don't either. I think Dallas is in pack it up watch, and we haven't even seen them play their week 2 game yet. I mean, the Dak Prescott injury is just so devastating for them, and like we talked about earlier, they didn't look particularly good before he went out in that game. So I just don't see how the Cowboys put points on the board unless we really get to garbage time in this one. And, I think the Bengals can put them there, certainly. So I think the total is pretty, an interesting one for this one. But yeah, I see the Bengals just covering this one with relative ease. I'm not sure if I'm using a road team in Survivor necessarily, but when there's some other good options on the board. But yeah, Burrow, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, that's kind of all you need, I think here. I think those guys are like that trio is going to get it done pretty comfortably against a Dallas team that just isn't going to be able to match them, to keep up. And, eventually, all those short possessions that I imagine Dallas is going to have is going to make that defense tired. And then the Bengals, then it's really all systems go.
Yeah, I predicted this one in my picks column, 26-13 in favor of the Bengals. Yeah, I don't think we see the Bengals put up a huge number here. I mean, Dallas's defense, again, did look pretty good against Tampa Bay, at least controlling Tom Brady through the air. I mean, Leonard Fournette was running wild for much of the night. But we also saw the Bengals offensive line, struggle in week 1. That was a big part of the reason for some of those turnovers, a big part of the reason they never really felt like they had a rhythm. And, we saw what Micah Parsons was able to do coming off the edge against the Buccaneers. So I do think Dallas keeps this from getting like completely out of control, but it's like you said, if the Bengals score 20 points, that might be enough in this game, because I just don't see this Dallas offense doing much of anything. We talked Raiders Cardinals, I guess, in the last segment. Let's get to our teams, the Colts and the Jags, the Ravens and the Dolphins. And I'll throw you a bone here. We could talk Ravens Dolphins first. I don't want to bury the lead on the Jags too much here, but I get the feeling that you're probably a little nervous about this one.
You are correct, sir. Not feeling great. Again, I don't think that there's a lot that you can take away from the Ravens win against New York. I think basically any team in the league could have done what they did to the Jets a week ago. I think, you alluded to it earlier with the lack of run game that Baltimore had. It's never a good sign when Kenyon Drake, someone that you sign, very late in the offseason, is your leading rusher, but, leading rusher with an asterisk, like only 30 some odd yards, something like that on 11 carries, dished out a handful of carries to Mike Davis. That doesn't look like it's going to work out. Justice Hill, that's really never looked like it was going to work
Cut
out.
Cut
Yeah, got done. So, I mean, it feels like history is repeating itself. This is a team that's, I think, so well known for its rushing ability, but this is the second year in a row now where you're just counting on these veteran retreads and it's not working. And then Juwan James tears his Achilles, and he's been kind of counted on to be a stopgap replacement at tackle until Ronnie Stanley's back. Ronnie Stanley not back yet. So, that offensive line in and of itself just isn't going to be able to generate quite enough push against this Miami front. Like, I don't think Miami has, I think the strength of their team is mostly in the secondary, but I think that in a way that makes it almost more concerning for the Ravens in that they're not going to be able to run the ball against the Dolphins. Like, what does that mean for them moving forward? So they are at home. The secondary looks pretty strong. If they get Marcus Peters back, that's big. Kyle Fuller just went out for the season. But Marcus Williams, he had the interception. He looked good. Chuck Clark was all over the field. Marlon Humphrey, I still believe, is one of the better corners in the league. So that's to me where this game is won or lost is how much the Ravens can limit the big plays to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. If they're able to keep a lid on it and maybe generate a bit of a pass rush themselves, they're really deep or thin as far as that pass rushing depth is concerned. Odafe Owe and Justin Houston, like, they're two good players, but like they are literally the only outside linebackers on the team other than maybe like Steven Means or something. Like, so it's a strange roster construction the way they've done it. But all of this is a roundabout way of me saying I think the Dolphins keep this to a field goal. So if you're still seeing it at 4 on Sunday, I side with the Dolphins, and I might even sprinkle a little bit on the money line as far as the Dolphins go on this one. It wouldn't completely shock me. I'm just not encouraged by the way that the Ravens played on Sunday enough to where I feel confident in them beating a legitimate NFL team like the Dolphins. Dolphins who also beat the Ravens as huge underdogs last year down in Miami, threw a lot of cover zero at Lamar. So we'll see how they're able to respond to that, because I assume he's going to see more of it on Sunday.
Yeah, the Dolphins very quietly 9-1 straight up in their last 10. Played a lot of low scoring games. I'd look at the under in this one, but I'm really on the fence here. I'll probably back the Ravens, just given that they're at home here. But yeah, it feels a little shakier than it should. And Marlon Humphrey, by the way, limited at practice today. So something to keep an eye on in that secondary. Like you said, already some attrition for the Ravens. Real quickly on the Jags, I mean, this is just an auto fade for me. They've actually played the Colts really well over the last few years. It doesn't really make any sense.
In Jacksonville.
Yeah, in Jacksonville. I mean, they play him well really everywhere, but in Jacksonville especially. We saw some good things last week, but at the end of the day, it kind of just struck me as like a same old Jags type of game. Lawrence whipping up that duck on 3rd and long to essentially end the game was just so vintage Jaguars. We've seen that from many Jags quarterbacks before him. It's good to see that he's falling in line. But I don't know. I always basically bet against the Jags, pick against the Jags. If they win, great. More often than not, that's been an extremely profitable strategy for the last 4 or 5 years. But this one to me is harder to figure out than it should be. I think a week ago you would look to this game and say, oh boy, this should be somewhat of a layup for the Colts. Jags should be better, but we think the Colts are probably going to take this division. And they fell behind 20-3 against the Texans. And the biggest thing that strikes me in this game, and specifically about the Colts, is we knew this going in. You and I talk fantasy all the time. They just have no weapons. Like, other than Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman, this might be legitimately the worst receiving core in the league. And Pittman is really good, and he was great in week 1. But, I mean, Alec Pierce had the second worst drop behind Christian Watson last week. And other than that, it's guys that even seasoned NFL fans haven't heard of.
Yeah, I mean, Ashton Doolin, right? Like, he's a guy.
Sure, maybe. That could be a totally made up name. No, you're right. That is one. Yes.
Mike Strachan. I don't know if he's he's someone that I picked in the last round of the RotoWire staff dynasty 2 years ago, because he had impressive athletic measurements coming out of, I forget, maybe Cal Poly or something. This is
Charleston.
That's right. How could I forget?
Yeah, shame on you.
Truly, I'm supposed to be the college guy, right? But not great. That does kind of steer me for I don't have a ton of props that I'm targeting just yet. But so if you really want to get a little wild with your potential return on investment, maybe take a look at the board for 2 touchdowns scored for Michael Pittman. If you like him
Okay.
for 1 on Sunday, there's a chance that if Indianapolis has 2 touchdowns through the air, both of them go to Pittman. So I think we saw a week ago that this Jaguars front, Trayvon Walker looking pretty good, but the secondary still has some work to be done. And Pittman really the only threat in that passing game. So I wouldn't mind taking a look at Pittman for 2 touchdowns through the air on Sunday.
Yeah, I know you like Lamar over 19.5 completions as well. I'm on board with that. I think they could struggle to run the ball again, although we'll see what J.K. Dobbins is able to bring to that team. I like Aaron Jones, first touchdown score in Packers Bears. You can get that at around 5-1. I think they're going to make a very clear concerted effort to get Aaron Jones more involved after he had only 8 touches last week against Minnesota. Christian Kirk, sticking with Jags Colts, anytime touchdown is 2-1. He was far and away Trevor Lawrence's favorite target in week 1. That to me was very, very clear. We expected that to be the case, but it was even more dramatic, I think, than I expected. So I think they want Christian Kirk to be the number 1 receiver. Trey Lance, 16.5 completions is really interesting. I have no idea, based on what happened last week, that's just kind of a throwaway game. I think I would go over on that, but we'll see. Again, not much to take away from last week, and that game to me is that could go any direction. I hope Trey Lance works out, but we just don't really have any evidence yet. Let's talk some Survivor, and then we'll do our best bets, and we'll do a little college football talk in advance of week 3. But give me the team that you will most likely be using in Survivor this week.
So for me, for Survivor, I'm going with the Packers. That's another, we've talked a lot about teams that are heavy favorites this week that are coming off of losses or shaky performances a week ago. And I feel most confident in the Packers. They dominate that series. Aaron Rodgers says he owns them. We all heard it. We all saw it. We've all seen it for like 12 plus years now. I don't take anything away from the Bears win necessarily. They just kind of they played in the mud better than the 49ers did. Obviously, the Packers still have some work to do as far as receiving core is going to go. Poor Amari Rodgers. He's a returner for us right now. That is just a tough one from Aaron Rodgers, like a scintillating sentence that on its surface to a normal person would just kind of look like a throwaway quote, but very, very pointed. But I think that the Packers at home, they roll. So I'm using the Packers in Survivor.
Yeah, I mean, I know I like the Packers to win big on Sunday night. They would be my choice as well for Survivor. I mean, if you're throwing out the spread and you're just picking a straight up winner, it's. I mean, I can't imagine what would happen if the Packers lose to the Bears at home in week 2. Aaron Rodgers might just retire on the spot. So that one to me it's not a lock. Nothing's ever a lock, but I like that a lot. It's interesting if you look at the most popular Survivor picks as of right now. The Rams are by far the most popular pick this week. Almost 30% of entrants going with the Rams. I understand it. I think I would maybe want to save the Rams and use them a little bit later. But, that one, too, it's hard to imagine the Rams dropping that game to the Atlanta Falcons. I would also consider Denver if you didn't use them last week. Obviously, if you did that, you're not even in Survivor anymore. So you should have them available. I like Denver to win that one outright. I like Cincinnati to win outright against Dallas. I would, if you want to go contrarian and you think maybe one of those teams gets tripped up, I would maybe consider Las Vegas, especially because they have a really difficult schedule and there's just not that many games where you're going to feel great about the Raiders and, kind of kicking the Cardinals while they're down here in week 2. I would think about that one. And they're not going to be a very popular pick this week. Any teams sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's an interesting call because like you said, when such a high percentage is concentrated on just a handful of teams, like obviously the Packers are going to be popular. I'm glad that the Rams never really crossed my mind for Survivor. Like after last week, I think you got to take a wait and see approach. You can't just apply last year to this year when it comes to trusting the Rams to that extent, even at home. So yeah, I could see a lot of the lemmings falling off the cliff with I'm not saying for sure, but crazier things have happened. And I feel good about as good about the Bengals as a road survivor team as you can, but I'm trying to avoid that, especially after last week. I did have one survivor entry. We kind of play with kitty gloves in that one. You get one strike. But my strike comes in week one with the 49ers. And then I think, the Raiders, really interesting call. I think that them at home, all the negative stuff that we've kind of established here about the Cardinals, I don't see a way in which the Cardinals win, period. And no one is going to be on the Raiders, it feels like, when you have teams that are favored by that much more, whether it is the Rams or the Broncos or something like that. And I would almost, if I was really sick in the head, I would even think about using the Browns this week, honestly.
Browns are the second most popular pick right now, so you're not really as much of a sicko as you might think, John.
That hurts.
Well, there's just not that many spots you're going to feel comfortable using the Browns, especially for next 12 weeks. Jets is literally the best possible matchup. So I actually understand that one quite a bit. All right, let's go to best bets. Let's lock it up here. Give me your best bet against the spread for week 2.
Give me the Texans. I'm riding with them. Texans plus 10. They keep this one somewhat competitive. Going out on a huge limb, Texans lose this one by a touchdown or less. So if this line moves at all, I'm going to keep going with the Texans all the way to 6.5 or 7. I don't think it moves there because I think a lot of people aren't paying close enough attention to Mills Mafia. So I will take the Houston Texans to cover.
All right. I like it. I'm not touching that one myself, but I respect the hell out of it. I'm going with the Packers. It's a big number. You're taking the underdog to cover a big number. I'm taking the favorite to cover a big number. Packers minus 10 against the Bears. I went 27-15 Packers in my picks column. I don't think it's going to be pretty, but I think the defense plays really well. I honestly, now that I'm looking at that, I don't know if the Bears even get to 15 in this game. Since 2010, Green Bay 10-2 straight up against the Bears at Lambeau. 7 of those 10 wins have come by at least 10 points. And really, of all the Bears teams that they faced over the last 12 years, this might be the worst of them all. So I think we see a pretty big bounce back from Green Bay. I'm not convinced that all of a sudden they're a great team. They still have a long road, I think, until they're beating some of the better teams in the league based on the deficiencies we saw against Minnesota. But I think they take care of business with ease against the Chicago Bears, as they are wont to do. But that's going to wrap up the NFL gambling portion of the podcast. Again, make sure if you're betting, you're doing it on BetMGM and you're using our promo code BETROTO, BETROTO. That's BETROTO. You can do that at the BetMGM app or on BetMGM.com. Let's talk some college football, John.
All right.
We had a fun week 2. Alabama, Texas turned into a much bigger fight than we thought it would. Not going to touch on Washington State, Wisconsin at all. We're just going to gloss right over that. I have no thoughts. I don't want to talk about it. But week 3, kind of similar to week 2, where you don't have these like massive marquee matchups that we saw a couple weeks ago, but we still get Miami, A&M. That's a ranked game. We still get BYU, Oregon. That's probably the featured game of the week. Your Dogs are on the road at South Carolina, but take me through, the games that you have your eye on from a betting perspective.
Yeah. So this is one of those weeks where college football, like just the product itself, is going to have to outshine the names, because there really aren't the big marquee ranked matchups. And, a lot of the luster off of the A&M Miami game gets lost because of A&M falling to App State at home last week. That's an interesting one, with Miami coming in as 5.5 point underdogs in that one against Texas A&M. I guess that almost qualifies as the game of the week, like you were saying. There are a couple there. How does Nebraska respond after firing Scott Frost in a situation that was so bad that they couldn't even stomach 3 more losses after stomaching tons of losses? Still couldn't wait till October 1st to cut that buyout in half before parting ways with old Scotty. And then, Nick, did you see the clip of Frost sliding down the railing of the athletic facility? Yeah, that was.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that was some
I thought it was like a deep fake at first. I couldn't believe that it was real, but it was.
Yeah, so that was that he looked like a high school bully from an 80s movie or something. After like getting detention or like leaving detention or something. But anywho, looking ahead, lines that I like for this weekend. I like Ole Miss minus 15.5 at Georgia Tech. I know that Ole Miss has kind of played a musical chairs with its quarterback room. I think that is more some respect and some deference to Luke Altmaier, but I think that Jackson Dart is ultimately the guy for Ole Miss when Ole Miss decides to start taking things seriously. They've obviously just played Troy and I forget off the top of my head last week. So that this is the first like real-ish test that they have, and it's here in Atlanta. But Georgia Tech, I don't really feel like is equipped to stop Ole Miss. So, and I think Ole Miss's defense is going to really be a lot of trouble for this Georgia Tech team. So I could also understand the under in that one. If you get it at 64, I like taking the under on Ole Miss versus Georgia Tech. I like BYU or BYU plus 3.5 at Oregon. I feel like that might be a very public side, but I do believe that Oregon just simply is a step or two behind where they were a year ago. I think there's still some kinks being worked out. I think that, we're not going to see what we saw in week 1, Georgia against Oregon, but I think that BYU is a very physical team. I know they're coming off of an exhausting game against Baylor last weekend at home, but if they get one of Puka Nacua or Gunnar Romney back, I think that they're in really, really good shape here. And I think that they showed last week by beating Baylor without them that they can still get it done, regardless of those guys' statuses. So I really do like BYU in this one. They're sacking the quarterback. They're looking good. And then, almost akin to your Jags fadage, anytime that Maryland plays someone with the pulse, I'm going to bet on the opponent. And this week, the Terrapins do have someone with a pulse. They're playing SMU at home. SMU can score points, and we've seen Talia Tagovailoa just really turn into a pumpkin sometimes when the pressure is on. He's very, very erratic. He can either turn in these great games like he did these first couple weeks of the season, but anytime that the defense is even moderately tough, we start to see him turn the ball over. You turn the ball over to SMU, they're going to penalize you for it. They're going to score some points. So I would consider SMU on the money line, and I definitely like them to cover 3.5 in College Park. So pony up for that one.
Yeah, literally pony up, and pony up for SMU. Thoughts on A&M Miami? Obviously A&M coming in ice cold, as cold as it gets, having lost that game to App State last week. I mean, all but knocking them out, you would think, of the title race, a team that a lot of people had as a potential dark horse. But can they bounce back at home against Miami?
Well, they need to. But I think that last week was so unnerving if you're an A&M fan. Like you kind of have to question so many things because there's so much positive momentum coming into the season just about this team. But I think a lot of it was a little bit misguided because a lot of it was tied to this recruiting class. And like, yes, it is on paper the best recruiting class ever, but what is a recruiting class in 2022 if it's a 22 class? They're all freshmen. They're all true freshmen. Like you can't just expect these guys to be your top contributors top to bottom. So it's, as if these guys all stick around College Station and that's not a guarantee at this point, even if the NIL deals are so good that, that they are going to end up sticking around. But I think for this year, it's a concern. I think that the problem really starts with the offense. I don't think that they're particularly deep at receiver. And I think that, as you can imagine, I don't think Haynes King is the guy. He won the job coming out of camp last year, looked pretty bad before he got hurt. Hasn't looked good this year either. You have Max Johnson, who I think has the processing speed of like a 2006 desktop, just so slow with his decision-making in the pocket. Then you have 5-star Connor Weigman, who I guess is not quite ready yet to play. So they have this stockpile of talent. They don't seem to know how to use it. And I'm just concerned about the way that this season goes for A&M. I think that, that they will turn it around. I think they should win at least 8 games, but I think that Arkansas is a better coach team. I think that Arkansas can beat them. I definitely think that Alabama is going to beat them and then some. So that game's coming up next month. As it pertains to this game, you know what? I'm going to ride that negative momentum. I'm going to say that Miami goes into Kyle Field and gets it done as 5.5 point underdogs. So got to keep an eye on Miami. They did just lose Xavier Restrepo, their number one receiver, but Tyler Van Dyke, if he has room or time to operate here, I do like his chances of making it work against this A&M secondary. So I will go with Miami to cover the spread in this one.
Major is Miami back potential if they win this game. I think the bar continues to be lowered as to what could possibly define them being back, but I think beating A&M even after the loss that A&M took last week would be enough for that conversation to get started yet again. But good breakdown as always, my man. You can find the college football chatter in our RotoWire College Football podcast feed. We'll keep it at the end of the RotoWire Sports Betting Podcast as well, sponsored, of course, by BetMGM. Thank you to everybody for listening. Last week, we did great numbers. We're hoping to keep this thing building throughout the year. John and I will be back this time previewing week 3.